people take sound for granted. And it's no different in the world of any kind of media production. People will go cuckoo bananas over the location they're shooting on and what camera they've got and how well it's lit, and sound will be a total afterthought. And then they wonder why their film gets rejected from a festival because they didn't think about sound. You could have the most gorgeous actor on screen with this amazing costume in the beautiful location with pristine lenses, but if the sound is not there, or if the sound is bad, you've lost everything.
Carl Welden is an artist of sound. It's very interesting. When we look at our lives and we look at the world surrounding us, we interpret the world through our five senses. And sometimes it's so easy to just let the world float by and not really be truly present in the moment, and really not utilize our senses to bring us into the moment. But Carl is unique in so many ways. And one of the ways is utilizing sound as an art form to help bring people into the moment. And he's worked on many different projects over the course of his lifetime that have utilized sound as an art form. And his love of sound goes all the way back to when he was a child, hearing sounds around him, hearing soundscapes, eventually getting involved in music, and then getting involved in performance, in public readings of poetry and spoken word, and leading him into the medium of film that he continues to work in today, amongst other projects. And so Carl has got a lot to talk about today, a lot of life stories. I want to thank you again for being here today. This is a great interview. One thing to note is that the video in the beginning of this interview is intermittent. So it did go out for a brief period of time, but the substance is still there. The audio is still there, and the stories are still there, and that's what matters the most. And the video will come back in to the interview, into the podcast episode, further in the episode. So just listen in, enjoy the audio. I mean, that's what this whole episode is about audio and soundscape experiences. And I hope you enjoy. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Geidel, and welcome back to the Stories by Joe podcast. I appreciate you being here today. Today, we're here with Carl. And Carl, how you doing today?
My life's extraordinary. No complaints.
Well, we're out of the heat right now, so that's a positive thing. Upstate New York getting hit with a pretty bad heat wave today, but all things considered, we're inside and everything's good. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah, it's a little cooler here in the Catskills than some of the urban areas, but it's still a bit much.
There we go. So I just want to start out basically from the beginning. Can you share a little bit about your life, where you're from, and what you do for a living?
Sure. Well, my name is Carl Welden. I'm currently a production sound mixer for film and television. Work in theater and a lot of different forms of things in the entertainment industry. But I live in the Mid-Hudson area, a little town called Rosendale, New York. Grew up in New Paltz, more-like area, and this is home. I've traveled around a bit and wintered in other places that were warmer in those times, but the Hudson Valley is a region I've always come to, love, and happy that I can make a living doing what I love and be around an amazing community and be part of it. that's, yeah, that's the who I am and where I'm at.
That's great. And I know that you are heavily involved in audio production as a career and also visual arts as well. How do you think growing up in the Hudson Valley, specifically in Ulster County, how do you think that played a role in your development in becoming interested in those art forms?
I mean, I started kind of as a cartoonist, and always was raised in an environment of fine arts and illustration and such like that. But as a young adult in New Paltz, college town, lots of arts and creative stuff, musicians. In the mid '90s, during the national boom of spoken word and poetry, I kind of jumped into that scene, and you could write all kinds of incredible stuff, but if nobody could hear you, your message wasn't getting anywhere. So, harkening back to a microphone I had from my high school band and a guitar amp, I set up little sound systems and started hosting readings for other people or doing spoken word shows of my own, and started acquiring more systems, started doing sound for bands and then for theaters. I started touring in a theater company, performing as a puppeteer in a mask and puppet theater company, did that for 17 years. And over the arch of that, working as a stagehand and starting my own sound company, doing live sound for events and theater and such, segueing into broadcasting, being a radio personality and an engineer in radio. And that sort of was the last step before diving into film and television production. But I still work in theater and still work in, events and such as well.
Gotcha. So looking back all the way towards your early life, throughout life we have all of these moments, these aha moments, a lot of people call them. Do you have a specific moment that you can remember from your childhood that really inspired you to head down this direction? It's very interesting. You're talking about in the 90s how there was this influx of spoken word and how that was popular during that time. But was there an inception point that you can think of where you really decided, like, I want to go down this path in life?
I mean, we had tape recorders and microphones in my early childhood in the house, and I was just fascinated with recording and hearing my own voice and speaking in different accents and putting voice characters on and such. And later, the spoken word part of my career, became it launched a cast of characters that I used for voiceover. And so the two of those sort of nurtured each other. But at an aha moment, I think every once in a while, I would just look at what senses of mine really seem to kick in the most and inform me the most, in a way that, just seemed to transcend the others. And sometimes just closing my eyes and hearing the world around me, I could be transported places with simple sounds that I could never go by looking at a picture in a book or something. I could look at a travel magazine and see beautiful places and it didn't do anything for me, but I could hear a certain sound and it would bring my brain and activate my brain in ways that would say, like, oh, I can picture myself in some other setting just by hearing the soundscape. Like, well, you hear an old radio drama or someone doing Foley sound effects, and you hear a rooster crowing, it's morning in a rural place. If you hear helicopters and jackhammers, you're imagining yourself in some urban environment. You hear church bells, oh, it must be Sunday morning. Your brain fills in the rest. And I think listening to soundscapes and things that would stir the imagination, just like when someone reads a book, they get all this bigger stuff in their mind than when they see a film adaptation of it. From listening to the world around me, my brain would really get ramped up by audio input and sensory stuff, so that it was a path of excitement. How's that? There's a good a good descriptor.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. No, I totally get that. That's obviously, I feel like that's an experience that not everyone has. So that's a very, that's unique in being that you pick up these audio experiences, these soundscapes, from the world around you. A lot of people just, they look at the world and kind of float through the world, and they're not really as present. But it's interesting that you say, that your ear is tuned, that you hear all of these sounds. I think that's kind of a unique feature.
Everyone hears all these sounds, but not everyone listens. There's a reason we have different words, hearing and listening, and to differentiate it. And when I lecture about sound, I take people on a journey. I say, let's go way back. And I look, how far back? It's like the womb. You are floating in your mother's womb. You are bound by a sack that is nothing but yourself. You can't see anything. You can't taste anything. You can't smell anything. You can't touch anything that isn't this little world you're in. But you can hear. Sound is your first sense of something outside of yourself. It's the first, sense that's activated. It lets us know we're in an environment, that we're in a place, that there are things other than us, and then we're born and we forget about it. Nobody thinks about, the environments they're in, unless it's painfully noisy or something that gets them moving, or things like that. So it's sometimes it's a difficult passion to have, because most people take it for granted. It's sound is this transparent, invisible thing, but it's the medium I work in, so I have to think about it all the time.
Do you have moments from your early life? You're talking about going all the way back to the womb here. But do you have moments in your early life as a kid where sound really sticks out to you? Where it's any particular moments where you're like, okay, maybe this is this sense of mine is a little more tuned in maybe than some other people.
Yeah, if I look at a timeline of experiences I've had, there are moments that stand out to me where the sound I experience has elements that are both haunting and dreamy. It's not about saying, oh, this is literally the sound I'm hearing. For when a sound impacts me or resonates with me, and resonates is a good word, when it gives me an impression that is tied to some point in my life here and there. Sometimes it's just the sound of a voice, or hearing something that moves you, or a piece of music. It's almost as intangible as I've been describing, to place memories of such things. But I think of goofy stuff like, does anyone remember the first time they ever heard a didgeridoo and thought, what on earth am I listening to? Or walking in the woods and suddenly you hear some sound, but you don't see what's making it, and how your body and your mind and your nervous system reacts to an unknown noise that you can't figure out what it is. That's powerful stuff, because like I said, your imagination starts filling in the blanks. What is that rumbling noise I'm hearing behind the tree line? And it turns out it's some weird bird ruffling, or some bugs that are rattling or chittering, and but it's fun when our brains are filling in the blanks, trying to make sense of it. In the visual world, we have pattern recognition, where we look at things and our brains, make sense of it as best they can, so that it's logical. With sound, it's harder to, define something if it's something we've never encountered before.
So being a student of sound like you are, always, and also a teacher too, like as you said, you're teaching these classes specifically about sound. How's your approach to music? Has music played a significant role in your life? I would imagine that, talking about all these soundscapes where you're talking about sounds that have maybe different resonances to it, different feelings. You're talking about haunted sounds or haunting sounds.
Haunting and dreamy,
Yeah, yeah. So is music like, can it become like almost overwhelming? Because soundscapes obviously very relaxing, they surround us all the time, but music, just obviously play with sound. What is your relationship with music?
I I'm often asked, are you a musician? And I say, well, I play dozens of instruments, but I'm not a musician. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek. What I mean is I'm not a trained musician is what I'm saying, but I have an ear and I love to play instruments and participate in creating music, but also, I grew up listening to classical music in my father's art studio, and whatever music, growing up on radio, things like that. I listen to a variety of different things. If I was to look at a genre of music in my collection that I have more than others, it's film scores. I'm not a composer, but there's something about how film scores are an emotional portrait of the film, as I've heard it phrased. And they, are designed to take the listener on a journey to places to just, they emphasize action and things are, you can tell things are happening. There is a story sort of, loaded into where it takes you. If I'm just driving around, of course, I have a whole collection of tunes I listen to, songs and bands and things like that. But while a lot of my friends were listening to popular stuff, I was growing up listening to industrial music that sounded like, things breaking and machines operating. And I was learning to dance to, what was similar to like a factory floor. It was, a little bit different. And often experimental things that, weren't friendly to the pop music ears of my peers.
You're talking about industrial music. Does that include like Nine Inch Nails and groups like that? Or are you talking about something totally different?
Much, much earlier. Groups like Einstürzende Neubauten from Berlin, SPK from Australia, earlier stuff like that. Nine Inch Nails came a lot later, and I kind of leapfrogged over that. I met them one time.
Really? Well, okay. Well, what was that all about? How did you meet
I was
them?
at Woodstock '94. I was meandering about, and they came trudging through the mud right before their show, before they were covered in mud, and someone talked to them, and they said, "We're Nine Inch Nails," and the person's like, "I thought there was just one of you." Well, it's like, "Well, we're not," and I laughed my head off, and they laughed with me, and I was just like, I just had a nice to meet you moment. That was all it was. It wasn't any kind of musical collaboration or anything like that. It was just just like a random thing. It's like bumping into a band in the middle of a tent city in the squalor of Woodstock '94.
That's awesome. Is that the one where they burnt down the stage, or was that '99?
That was a different one. It was the first
okay.
concert it was the first concert I went to. I picked a doozy to start with. Before that, I think I had not seen anything outside of a band playing in someone's apartment. So
Yeah.
Was,
So okay, so you obviously growing up, you have this love of sound, this affinity with sound and soundscapes and the world around you. When did you take this love of sound and turn it into your career? I know that you worked on radio for a while, and I know that you've had other performances that you've done as well. Yeah, I think the puppet theater you were involved in. Can you tell me a little bit how you made that transition from being a student of sound into the career of sound?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of on track for visual arts growing up, and when I got into spoken word and performing, I loved playing with my voice and how it sounded, and listening to, well, going back to the music side, like there's a group called Negative Land, which samples from films, television commercials, and makes collages of things, and you know, twists the message around and changes it around. I thought, hey, if I can speak in a way that almost sounds like something people have heard before, sounds produced, if I talk like, if I'm speaking in voices that sound like there's something, people say, hey, where have I heard that? It's like, no, it's just the way I'm talking to you. Or if, in shifting gears and suddenly people are having stories told to them by some being from another time, being able to have such a malleable, larynx, it lent itself to, hey, here's something interesting. How can I, take what I'm doing and, make a buck or two at it. Sometimes it started out as passing the hat, but then I kept on getting told by people again and again and again and again, you should do voiceovers. You should do voiceovers. And in that era, it was pre-digital. We didn't have, there was no internet. People, my first voiceover demos on cassette tape, saying, things like, Chronogram magazine, your area's guide to arts, culture, and spirit, things like that. But as a person who was hosting open mics and things like that, I started to really cut my chops as an MC, a host, a presenter, a master of ceremonies, and taking my persona and making it larger than life, saying, how can I, be in a small room, but become humongous? And it was having bombastic, tones and characters that would come out of me. And if I had my own content I was doing and performing, that was one thing. If I was emceeing something, I had to keep the flow going for an event and be entertaining in segues between stuff. And I started getting hired by festivals and by events and being asked to do announcing for stuff. And I loved it. I still do. I think one person who helped me out along the way was, saying you kind of have to like love your own voice. A lot of people hear their own voice and they're like, they hear their voice on a message or, over the phone or someplace they recorded it, and it makes them cringe. I feel lucky. I mean, the golden pipes or whatever it is that, some people just get tuned into. I get to hear it. I get to play with it. I get to change it. I get to change my voice like I could change an outfit. If we were to for maybe be having this conversation in Eastern Europe, I would flatten my vowels, and it's not for to have accent, but to destroy my syntax a little. You still understand for everything I'm to be saying, but it's slightly more entertaining because I'm being very casual with it. I'm not forcing an accent upon you. I'm just throwing it away like it's not really important to me. Maybe I try to hide that I have accent and just sound as fluent as possible. And, being able to shift back and forth like on a dime, just to, again, it's like changing costumes. And as a performer, when I change a voice, I change my posture, I change my movements, my attitude goes with it too. I'm not like method acting. I am letting a personality inhabit me. They're all queuing up and have something to say. And that's where I think, having the mindset of a cartoonist, I started living like a cartoon character, and it means I'm never bored. To tie it up in a bow there.
No, that's awesome. So, I mean, you shared with me some of those experiences performing right there, but what was your first experience like getting on a stage or performing on, a street corner? Was there, can you bring me back to the time where you first were drawn to the idea of, what, I'm going to get up there? And what was the reaction like? What was the crowd like? Where was it to begin with?
I wasn't drawn to it. I was terrified. I mean, in my youth, all through high school days, I was a kid leaning on the wall while everyone else danced. But a friend of mine said, hey, they're doing a poetry reading at the New Paltz Youth Center. Do you want to come? I said, no. It's like, come on, there's going to be some people reading some poems. I was like, I don't like poetry. I don't write poetry. And they were like, oh, there'll be some girls there. I was like, all right, maybe I'll go. Yeah, and so I go, and I had no material. They had a sign up sheet, and I was like, I just walked over and I wrote my name up. I didn't have any material with me, but I signed up. It's like, okay, I just committed to something. I grabbed a scrap of paper. I sat down. I wrote something while I was in the queue to go up, and they called on me, and I just went up and did it. And the crowd reacted, so enthusiastically that it was a rush. And I was like, I am going to be doing more and more of this. And it's not often you have a moment like that where you feel like this is home. This is, it wasn't like, oh, these people get me. It wasn't like that kind of validation. It was more just like, I found an outlet, which is very important for anybody working in a creative field. Because so many of us, we do all this work and we never show it to anyone, or we do all this cool stuff and no one ever hears it, and to be able to express it, to let it out, to give it life, and get some appreciation. That's a great confluence of all the good things one can hope for. And that's why I say it launched everything else I do from there on out. I think, the performing arts is a home for every creative discipline under the sun. You can, no matter what your background is, whether you're whether you're talent or technician, whether you're on stage or backstage, whether you're a performer or operator, there is something, just fulfilling about it. Just like the need that humans have, we need food, shelter, clothing, water, and we need to create. We need to be, makers of things. And it beats the alternative, which is a destructive path. And I think a big part of me embracing a creative journey was that I was doing everything I could to avoid a very destructive streak in my life where I was hating myself and doing everything I could to destroy myself and bury myself. And while all my peers in high school went on to college, I had a psychotic break and went to rehab instead. And I was 19 years old and had to basically start my life over from that point. And, I've had a 30 plus year journey in recovery since then, trying to repair the damage done and loving every moment of it, because every day I get to learn new things. And my creative processes are a huge component of that, whether they be sound or just getting involved in a creative community.
That's powerful. No, that's amazing. I find that really inspirational. That the creative process is also like a form of self therapy in many ways. I find that for myself as well. Do you mind telling me why? And as long as you're okay with it, what caused this? This stressful period in your life, this period where you kind of had a breakdown. Like, was that in relation to to anything in particular?
Very often artists are more sensitive to the world around them, and it's like too much. And the easiest thing is to dull your senses chemically. So, the crutch of an addiction or whatever would help get you through that. If I didn't have to, if I hated being Carl, I didn't have to be Carl if I could, be whatever, a substance would turn me into. The problem was, I liked it too much, and it was working too well in that I was erasing Carl. It was so effective at destroying me that I was suddenly left with nothing. And that's why I say, like, having a break. The whole world was upside down in my brain, and the idea that if I lost myself, whether it was through complete disassociation from reality to, premature death from irresponsibility, whatever avenue would have been ahead of me had I stayed on that course. What stopped me from progressing downward that way was a sense of aesthetic that I learned from appreciating the arts. I can literally say that art saved my life because I said, if I am not here, I can't do art anymore. I better stick around. It's so simple, almost stupidly simple, but it was uh, something that I've been able to keep in my back pocket for decades. That hey, stick around, otherwise you'll miss out on all the cool things that you love so much. And I wouldn't have loved things so much had I not, had this sense of beauty in the world and fascination with our minds, our spirits, our emotions, and how we use all these things to create.
Do you think you would agree with the idea that our struggles are a blessing in a way? That our struggles, while they may not be, so great in the when they're happening, it helps build up who we are as people.
I would say that if everything is coming all too easy, I'm on the wrong track. I'm not learning anything. I've been on projects where everything goes so extremely well that I don't even remember it happening. Whereas where there were problems along the way that we tackled and solved and fixed and troubleshooting, I have deeper, richer memories. I learned more. I developed more as a person. You know, just like muscles. If you're just running along a flat line the whole way versus climbing up a hill, your development will be different. I'm not saying you should throw yourself into challenges. Life is hard enough on its own, but the challenges you take on, maybe someone else is doing something that looks monumental, and you think, oh, I could never do that. Well, think of the things that you can overcome and hurdles you can do. I mean, there have been times in people's lives where it's like, I can't get the cap on my toothpaste. I'm going to slip my wrists. I say to them, don't worry, it gets better. There's, it's like you'll be able to do that one day, and it'll feel like a miracle. If it's something so simple like that someone can get over. For me, I mentioned earlier, being the person who was on the outside watching other people have fun in my youth. When I was able to do that, it was such a catharsis. And so when you throw yourselves in challenges and you get through them, you come out a little bit bigger and enriched by it. They
Talking
do
about,
shape.
Yeah. Talking about your youth and going back where you said you felt like you were an outsider. Growing up, how was your family when it comes to supporting you along the way? When it comes to supporting you in your creative pursuits, how were they there for you?
I would say my family was very supportive in my pursuits. My mother was someone who collected all my artwork from my childhood and kept it around, and my father was a bit of a rock star in the printmaking world. And I was around artists constantly with him, and he would take me to places and show me things that were outside of the normal routine of someone else growing up. So creativity was normalized in my world. I'm not going to say they pushed it on me or encouraged me that way, but I would go to a friend's house and their parents were plumbers or electricians, and I'd be like, how come there's no art on the wall? How come there's no printing presses in your garage? And that was bizarre to me. So having the permission to always have a creative thing going, or having an environment that nurtured creativity, that's almost all the encouragement maybe I needed. Nobody had to foist it upon me. And in fact, if someone had, I would have probably been resistant. You can't tell me what to do. There's that too. I think if any of your listeners are parents or they themselves, going through creative processes and turmoil, because it is always a challenge. It's not the easier way. Contemplate that. What kind of environments are you putting yourself into? Like, if you're a writer, do you read anything? It's like, if you're not getting, stuff coming in, like it might be harder to generate everything yourself. I love exposing myself to things that challenge me in creative ways and things I haven't experienced before. If I keep seeing the same thing over and over again, I might find myself in more of a rut. That's not to say that routines can't be helpful for getting through the day, but for when you want to, push yourself, there's nothing like a little whack on the side of the head to give you that nudge.
I'm getting the impression you're an only child. You didn't mention any siblings. Am I right with that?
I've got a brother.
Oh, you do? Okay. Well,
yeah.
The only reason why I bring that up is because I'm an only child myself, and I feel like only children are kind of like a little more sensitive sometimes. I feel like maybe that might have been, if that were the case with you, I feel like maybe that would have been somewhere where your sound sensitivities might have come into play. But you got a brother. What's the relation?
I have a younger brother. He did not go. He went into the hospitality industry and culinary such, and a different path. But he digs what I do tremendously, and we talk about filmmaking a good deal. He'll watch something and he'll want to know, what processes or how is that done, or what do you think about that, or and I would tell him what life is like on a film set. We watch movies all the time and don't think about how they get made, and it's something I like. I love chatting with him about. It's one of his main occupations. Is like he can intake a lot of content. He had an accident about a decade back and is wheelchair bound now, and that I can have conversations with him and discuss creative stuff and how it can move and affect him and get into his memory, or that we can quote things that we watched together decades ago, and it can transport us back to moments. And that's some of the magic of it all. Just the way people can reminisce about song lyrics. He and I can do that with films we grow up with. Of course, nowadays there's just such a glut of content. It's hard to really latch onto things unless you become obsessed with them. But at a different time, when you're exposed to less, you treasured things a little bit more. Maybe, I don't know.
So what are your some of your favorite pieces of content growing up? Some of your favorite movies that you and your brother used to watch?
I mean, I've got a carousel of stuff in my head. It's not congealing into like, oh, this and this. I mean, we both grew up Gen X on Star Wars and things like that. As one. That's what we want to do. Sorry, a noise just happened here in where I'm. But I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on that one.
No, that's totally fine. Do you have a favorite movie of all time, or no? Yeah, it's hard to say.
It depends on the type of film.
Okay.
If someone's saying, "What's your favorite action film? What's your favorite, foreign film or whatever?" Then I hone in on something. But it's too general of, such a saturation point that it's hard to pick out.
Do you have
what's your favorite
film score? I know that's probably the next thing you're going to say, but do you have a favorite film score? You're talking to me about how these soundtracks stick out to you.
Currently, I have been re-listening a lot to the film score for the original 1980s Dune, David Lynch Dune. It was by Toto, Stop the Rain Down in Africa, and the Prophecy theme composed by Brian Eno. It's this, epic sweeping thing. But on any given moment, I'll be listening to, Basil Polidor's Conan the Barbarian, or Tom Tickver's Run Lola Run, which is like hard techno and songs. And, I'll throw in, Wendy Carlos's, Tron soundtrack from Disney in the 80s. I was probably in middle school when I saw it. and it was the first computerized film, and the music was electronic, and it was wild. And I revisit it decades later, and without watching the film, I can listen to a film score, and my mind fills in the pictures and tells me what was happening when I heard those things. Um, it makes a drive to the grocery store more exciting if I'm playing the soundtrack to the Road Warrior. So you can use these things to sort of augment your own experience, making them a little more dramatic.
Definitely. So, all right, kind of transitioning back to your career. You obviously have all these experiences that make you who you are. So, what would you say the first project that you worked on that you really resonated with, where you said, wow, this is something really impactful, something that, a project where, really set up the foundation for you to continue going down the path of your sound career?
A lot of people don't understand what it is I do on a film. So I'm a production sound mixer. Without me, it's a silent movie. Like I'm there to record all the dialogue. Someone else will put in footsteps and sound effects later, and someone else will put in music later. And I am, listening to the sound of my boom microphone, or the wires hidden on the actors transmitting from little microphones hidden under their clothing, and things like that. I would love to give you on a platter, here's the specific, project that changes it all for me. But it's almost like I've just got a series of moments where I will be listening to what's being made, and I will have this, this warmth wash over my body, where I just feel like I am so happy and lucky to be doing what I'm doing. This is amazing. And it's not always about what the project is. It's sometimes just this combination of, I love what I do. Not a lot of other people are doing what I do, and I feel like I'm good at doing what I do, and that makes it something I love even more. And when all three of those things hit, I get this sense like I am in the right place, and this is what I'm meant to be doing. Um, I've recorded my voice for a very long time, but recording other people's voices and capturing moments, it's sound isn't something that keeps still. If you pause sound, it stops. Or you just hear like one tone. It's a constant living thing. It's movement. It's a flow. It's vibration. I'm getting scientific and philosophical at the same time. It's this. I'm digitally capturing an organic experience.
No, that's, yeah, I totally understand what you're trying to say.
But
how important is silence when it comes to sound? I feel like when silence is strategically placed, it can, be very loud in many ways. Obviously, I'm speaking metaphorically, but silence is an extremely powerful tool. What is your relationship? You can approach it from a philosophical direction as well.
Close your eyes for a moment and, think, if you hear the shrieking violins of Psycho, and someone's getting stabbed, read, 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 read. It's exciting, but not like terrifying, Meanwhile, if you're watching some other film, what is the most scary moment? It's when all the sound goes away and suddenly your body gets so tense and the anticipation rises, and the slightest little thing happens and you jump out of your seat. Silence is something we're not used to. If it almost spells trouble for us on a primal level. I had a friend who was a Vietnam veteran, and I would crash on his couch, and he had the TV blaring 24 hours a day. And if he was asleep and I would turn the TV off, the guy would, come out of his bedroom and say, like, why'd you turn the TV off? And I'm like, sorry. He's like, I need that on. for him, it was an acoustic nightlight. As long as he's hearing stuff, things are okay. But when it got silent, that was bad news. Something bad was going to happen in his mind. And I carried that with me, thinking of like, wow, that's you know, just as effective as like, shouting at someone to surprise them, taking away somebody's sense. If you ever have had like an ear infection, or you experience a loud noise and suddenly you're taking a moment to recover from things and you lose one of your senses, the effect it can have on you is profound. And in storytelling, the cadence of your speech, if I'm going on and on and on and on and on and I stop for a moment, everyone like leans in a little bit closer. What's the next thing you're going to say? Silence is just as important sometimes in getting someone to come a little bit further. If you're shouting at people the whole time and you take your voice down to a lower level, they listen more intently. It's almost this idea of like, I'm going to withhold a little bit to draw you in a bit more, and then hit you with a kablam, make it more exciting. The space around words is just as important as sometimes the words I'm saying. If I'm talking in funny, goofy voices, I have to think how these sounds are carving out space in different ways. If I have to be in a quiet environment that's not competing with all the stuff I'm doing. So, it has its own value in so many ways.
You're talking about, again, kind of transitioning in a way. You're talking about talking in voices and performing as a character. You've been on tours. You've been on international tours, specifically, being a performer. Can you walk me through when you started to become recognized as a performer, and the effect that may have had on you, and how over the course of your career, you're starting to pick up jobs. I know you said you're a freelancer, but you're being recognized. What were some of the experiences like when you were going on this like international tours and performing? How did that play a role?
I mean, I traveled the U.S., performing in every little spot I could. A couple of jaunts to Europe here and there, okay, where I would, perform. Didn't tour internationally. Like, I didn't go all over Europe. It was just like, I'm here, I'm going to do some things. Had some small booking to see how could I entertain people who English might not have been their native language and things like that. And guess what? I was able to do it because it's not just the words. There's a physicality and delivery and a personality behind it all. And people could just enjoy the performance, But at some point, when I would see my picture in the paper in like an arts and culture section, or I'd be asked to do a radio interview, or some television would have me sit down for a talk show and ask my thoughts about poetry, and I would scoff and say, "Oh, I don't like poetry at all." Just to throw them throw them off. The recognition, achievement is its own reward, is this quote that pops into my head once in a while from some episode of Twin Peaks, Major Briggs, obscure references aside. That I think acknowledgement of it, though, it's validating. It's something artists need. It's like, am I making a difference? Is this question we're always asking ourselves? When someone responds positively to it, it's like, this is cool. I could walk down the street and be stopped over and over again by people like, "Hey, Carl, hey, Carl, hey, Carl." And it's cool. I would tell people, "Hey, I'm rich and famous, except for the rich part." What it did was give me access. It made me, accessible and approachable, and people wanted more of it and said, "Hey, we'd like you involved in something we're doing," or, "Hey, we're doing this thing. How would you go about it?" And sometimes being asked, to help on something is almost as valid as validating as like, "Hey, I did a cool thing." It's this interest, I look off in the distance as I think. I'm picturing all kinds of scenarios and points in my life where I've had experiences and being drawn into one person's world or another. And, the more things I've said yes to, the more experiences I've had. Um, and sometimes it's not so much about, is it going to further my career or is it going to enrich my understanding of life in the world? It's all up to an individual's taste, I suppose.
Just a hypothetical, what do you think you would be doing if you weren't, pursuing a career in audio and sound? Where do you think you would be if your life went down another path?
I'm writing a book. I'm trying that out, trying to see how that goes. I've written loads and loads of spoken word, and that's like storytelling. But to author something, to try and take this, fast-paced scramble of ideas and put them down for other people to read and learn from, because I'm writing a technical manual. It's not something that's like, you know, a paragon of creativity. It's more of a field guide and how to do something, a process for people who do film sound. It's still related to the field I'm in, but it's me pushing my understanding of how to translate a thought into something for a completely different kind of audience. I came from a world of spoken word where it was delivered in real time, in person, individually. People said, "Can I read your poems?" I was like, "I don't have poems for you to read. I mean, they're in a notebook somewhere." And I disappointed people sometimes. It's like they really wanted to read it because I want to hear those again. Or they'd say, "Hey, I remember this thing you said," and they'd totally misquote me because they didn't read it. Their memory heard it that way. So yeah, if I wasn't doing sound, I I could picture myself maybe in art department and doing visual things. I have side hustles, and they're always in a creative field. If I'm helping out a community theater on something, if I'm stage handing for a concert, if I'm helping someone just manage some media stuff from some vintage family recordings or whatever, somehow they're all under the umbrella of what I do. So I haven't migrated far from the world of sound. It's just different aspects on it because it encompasses so much. I mean, I was in a hospital and I met a sonogram technician, and I started trying to talk to them about sound from my perspective. And there's someone who uses sound in a completely different way than I am, but I'm trying to connect. I was like, "Hey, we have something in common. We both work with sound." They looked at me like I was nuts. But then they started to get what I was meaning. It's like, there was a commonality.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's true. Especially specifically the sonogram. That's a very interesting relation. You're literally. I mean, their job is sound too, but sometimes you don't think of. I
You
don't.
don't.
Sometimes you don't think of your work in relation to I guess, the sensory experience that you're operating in. It's just kind of like your senses are kind of just tools in many. In throughout life, and you don't really think of the tool as a form of art. I mean, specifically, you're talking about a practical job like that sonogram, but then it's very true what you say. It's literally using sound as a career in a very in a medical field, medical setting, but still sound nonetheless.
I can sit with my colleagues and we'll talk about, did you know how sound can be weaponized? And that is like a whole other, angle that we can make sounds that are pleasant and soothing and make someone feel like they're balanced in the world. And there are sounds that will drive a person insane, whether it's misophonia and they just hear a noise and it makes them nauseous or twitch, or, sounds that will literally be used to punish someone for torture purposes. It's astounding, the broad range. Like I'm lucky I work in the happier side of sound though. But
Yeah. I mean, that kind of brings up a very practical or very, I guess, a very, some sound is torture. I mean, if you're talking about that, I mean, during the Iraq War and Guantanamo Bay, they would play the national anthem over and over and over again down in Guantanamo Bay as a form of torture, which is really strange because obviously the national anthem is supposed to be this anthem of freedom, and yet it's used as in that scenario as a weapon of war, which is really disturbing. And then, I mean, you can even think about, I mean, other examples too. In recent times, Havana syndrome is maybe it's some sort of sonic kind of weapon that people have theorized. Yeah, that's really scary. Sound as a weapon. Jeez.
Well, people can witness a horrific thing and they can't get an image out of their head. But you can also have you'll have a memory stuck in your head. Like you'll some blood curdling sound or whatever like that might haunt you and might stick with you in a negative way. There was an experience I had, right around the turn of the century, where there was an active shooter in the town of New Paltz, and I acquired sort of PTSD from the experience. I flinch at loud noises and things, and this is decades later. It's astounding how my nervous system reacts. I mean, here I am. I'm someone who works with sound, and my whole body will jerk when I hear sudden noises. There's trauma tied into things, but on the flip side, I can hear a sound and I will get goosebumps and I'll feel like lighter. There's a full spectrum of effect to that sense. What's the most beautiful sound someone can hear? Sometimes it's someone saying their name. It's like I feel seen. Or the sound of their mother's voice, or things like that. I don't know. I only hope that if any sounds I'm making or involved in are somehow memorable. I would like to write a catchy hook that someone can't get out of their head, a little earworm somewhere, and just like, hey, even though I'm not there, my sound is persisting and going somewhere that I can speak to an audience and tell a story, and if they're talking about it later, then my story is going further than the audience I spoke to. That my words will go on and be absorbed or come out of people in some other way. Their minds are shaped by something, and it's not about always the sound, but it's the information that I'm transmitting verbally. I hope as I speak to you and your listeners that what I'm saying is accessible. That I'm, yes, I kind of jump around and describe things scientifically and philosophically and emotionally, but there's a through line of it all that I hope folks can latch onto. You're listening to a podcast, maybe you're watching it too. If any of it is gelling somewhere, then I hope it, I hope it lights something up in your neurons.
Definitely. Yeah, no, we're all about the philosophical end of things here on this podcast. So I know I appreciate you going deep into the experiential side of things and the philosophical side of sound. I mean, I think that's extremely interesting. So you mentioned being memorable as something that's important to you, whether it be your performances or some of the sounds that you work on. Why do you think being memorable is something that is important to you? Is the performance itself enough, or how does that, the staying resonance? Why is that important to you? Do you feel?
It's part of the I am. Like I existed. I maybe I'm not making a monument somewhere, but I'm making a mark. Making a lasting impression, and it might not be some like I said, a monument, but it's making a difference in yeah, I'm not saving the world, but if I can help someone understand their own perspective or themselves or the human experience through my interpretations, I see that as a win. If if they have no recollection where they got the idea from, that's okay too. But it's fun to have someone come up to me and say, "Hey, you said something years ago, and I still think about it." That's like, what a gift. Or it's like I wrote something you said down, and I look at it every day. It's on my fridge. It's like wow, I'm somebody's positive affirmation, because I still look at myself, as like, you know, I'm this poor damaged human being. I'll picture who I was in my youth, and sometimes forget all the growth that has happened over my lifetime. If I'm throwing myself like a little pity party in my head, and then someone will come up and say that, and it washes it all away, and and that's when it's one of these good moments, one of these wins. If I can, if I can impart something that helps somebody else get a little further down the road, either because there was no one there to help me along when I was in that space, or because someone else did help me and I want to be able to pass that along. Either way, it's worth the effort for me. And yeah, but getting some acknowledgement down the road doesn't hurt.
No, that's awesome. I totally resonate with that for sure. I mean, trying to, leave a positive mark on the world is obviously super admirable, and that's awesome. You're talking about some people that come up to you and they say, that your performance or something you said has made an impact on them. Are there any particular performances or things that you've worked on that you feel are centerpieces of your career, where you're like, wow, that particular thing that I worked on, that was something else, there anything that you can recall that's like the kind of these foundational pieces of your career?
I mean, when I'm working on someone else's project, it's not necessarily something that reflects on me. It's like, hey, the whole team did good, but personal works and performances and presentations I've given where someone is deeply moved or makes a change in their life and it tells me about it, it's happened. And, I'm sometimes shaken by it. Like, wow, that was a powerful experience. I tackle a lot of mental health issues in some of my performances. I take, the roots of my breakdown and, say how they can be, the key to a healing process for myself, because they can maybe help someone else. I try and speak in a way that, like I said, when I want it to be accessible, what I mean by that is something that everyone can identify with. I don't get up in front of a crowd and say, I'm different than all of you, because then I have completely isolated myself from everyone that could be benefiting from it. I've robbed them and myself of that connection. Connection is what really helps all of us out. And if I come in and and say something everybody identify with, they click, they're ready for more material. Just like if you're watching a stand-up comedian and they make some little observation about life, everybody gets it. Whereas if they were to say something that, well, nobody thinks like that, it might be quirky or funny or peculiar, but it's finding a common ground. And it's one of the first things we try and do. I mean, a lot of people are terrified of public speaking. I mean, scared to death of it. I'm still nervous when I get up in front of people. I've been in front of a crowd of 1,000, at a festival or whatever. And I just think nervousness is energy. How can I transform that and make it into the fuel of what I'm going to do, and use that energy into the performance? And if I can break the fourth wall and make eye contact with someone and make that connection, I'm reading or presenting ideas that I've had my whole life, but in that moment they feel like that I'm talking straight to them, and they get something out of it. If someone approaches me later and say like, I've had a lot of like bad thoughts in my head, and you shed some light on something, and I'm looking at things differently now. I mean, I'm just like, gee, yeah, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I've somehow just I've somehow just survived despite my best efforts. This is what worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. I can't tell anyone else what to do, but if I can be a powerful example, or if anything I do along my journey helps somebody else along the way, then it's just gravy. How lucky am I?
Yeah. And so we're talking about your performances and, and how they leave a lasting impact on people. And, we're kind of just, we're just saying performances. What is it exactly that you perform? I know you, in the very beginning of this episode, you're talking about different voices that different characters that you utilize. Talk to me about your performing. What is it exactly that you do, and how how do you build these characters, and what does it look like, a performance of yours? What does it entail?
I will take dictation from a rotation of characters in my head. It's not like, a fragmented schizoid mind. It's more just like, a community of instances and chapters in my life and personalities that have developed, along the way, that were either amusing or funny. And each of them reflects a different attitude and emotion, and they all line up and have something to say. So I write it down. I'll write a beginning, I'll write an ending, and I'll ricochet back and forth until I get filled in the middle. Sometimes it sounds like stream of consciousness stuff, and I'm ricocheting all over the place with different ideas, but there'll be a through line that everybody seems to get. It has some things similar to poetry. There will be a refrain, like in songwriting has a chorus. Something that is hammering one particular message home, but it's couched in other little bits and bobs of ideas that people can pick and choose and say like, oh, that makes sense, or oh, that's funny, or oh, I think like that too. So there's enough for someone to latch onto because it's familiar, and enough that it's like, here's something new, and keeping it entertaining. I have to compete with television and video games and short attention span stuff. So having a style where I am changing characters with every single sentence I say, I mean, I'm a human. It's like human channel surfing, and that's the best way I can describe. Think of the Beetlejuice, Max Headroom, sort of Jim Carrey style of Robin Williams. Just this, being able to shift back and forth. When I was doing some voices earlier, just dropping it out of them, it wasn't like I must prepare to do this. It was just if I'm telling jokes, I don't just say, here's the joke. I make it a story. I flesh out the characters. I give them personality. And the same goes for if I am doing a spoken word performance, or if I am presenting and just being an over the top announcer. Yes, I can sound announcery, but if I make something silly and ridiculous and intrinsically me about it, they're getting something special and making their event special in that way. If I've been on a line at a grocery store and started talking to the cashier, and someone behind me says like, do I know you? They don't know me, but they recognize something about the way I talk or the things I say. And maybe I'll tell them, yeah, I worked in radio for a while. I was like, oh, or I did voiceover. It's like, oh, is there anything I might know that you've done? And every voice actor gets asked this question, and you need a quick out. So in my back pocket, I'll just say something like, equal housing lender, member FDIC. And they're like, you said that? It's like, well, no, everybody has said that, but at least it validates that they picked up on something. So you're throwing them a bone. I get a kick out of it all. Honestly, it's fun and who, but my style of performing, it's it's performance poetry, it's stand up poetry, it's it's storytelling, it's this amalgam of different ways of communicating. It's if it seems like a lecture one moment and an advertisement the next, and an intimate conversation all rolled up into one, but just shifting over and over again, just like chord changes in music. It's there's a music locked into the language, and while I might be running around the room, jumping up on furniture, getting into audiences' faces while I'm doing this, it'll seem chaotic, but everything in my mind is surgically precise. I know when to breathe. I know when to turn my head. I know when I'm going to twitch my body. I know a certain line that it's like, oh, I've got to make eye contact with a person when I say this set of words, because I know it's going to, it's going to really resonate with somebody. It's like zing. And they're like, how did you know? And it's like, it's not that I knew something about you. I don't know who you are, but I knew that you would connect with what I'm about to say. It's wild. And it makes me enjoy it makes me enjoy the performing process.
That's great.
I mean, I'd like to give you some movie stories. There's an indie film shooting in Ellenville during the COVID bubble era, when there was no vaccine and no testing, and everyone gathered in a production bubble and swore that they didn't encounter other people for 2 weeks before shooting. We all lived together, and we're doing this science fiction film horror thriller thing, and there's a dinner scene with real food on the table on a hot summer day, and the food sat there all afternoon, and these flies showed up, and they were ruining the takes because they were either landing on actors' faces, or they were buzzing by the microphones, or they were just, you didn't just want to see flies buzzing around when people were talking. And so I'd say, can we stop for one moment? And I would go in and I would hold my hands over the fly, clap, and the fly would just go into my hands. And I had this body count of flies, and they almost wanted to change my role in the credits as, human fly swatter.
Fly swatter. That's hilarious.
Goofy, wild, good times.
No, that's really funny. Actually, talking about film, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I'm curious. How did you? So it's okay. So going from radio, which is one world, into the world of film, the visual world. How did you make that transition? I know a lot of people really aspire to be involved in film, and it's kind of a difficult world to break into. I mean, depending on your approach to it, you obviously can get involved in the documentary scene, the indie scene. How did you begin your involvement with film? And can you just tell me about your relationship with film?
It's similar to, you say, my start in voiceover, where everyone was saying, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. And I started doing it so people would stop telling me I should do it. With film, it was more, hey, can you do sound for a film? And I was like, the first question came to my mind is, what do I need to do? How do I need to prepare myself so that I can say yes the next time I'm asked? As having all kinds of equipment for doing live shows on a stage, I say, hey, is there anything I can use from my music world for film? It's like, yeah, your cables, and that's about it. And it was very funny because, radio is, there's a studio built, you show up, you hit the mic and you go, it's all talking. There's no picture involved. You don't have to worry about what a scene looks like. You don't have to worry about lighting or shadows or makeup or wardrobe or anything. You just have to have a nice voice. How did I get into it? People were asking if I could do it. And I found out, here's a couple of things I have that could work, a little field recorder, something to mix the channels. Could I get a couple of wireless mics and a boom? Got into some little kind of documentary, testimonial, commercially kind of things here and there. Jumped on a little scrappy indie film, but somewhere, how did it get really started? I was driving my daughter to be in a public service announcement, a PSA for joining a parent teacher organization. And I was wearing a T-shirt that said Shure, the Shure brand of microphones. And the camera guy, a guy named Brandon Ziegenfuss, he said, "You're a sound guy?" I was like, "Yeah." It's like, "Do you want to hold the boom for us?" And I was like, "I haven't done it before." Basically, it was, but I said, what can I do to say yes? So I was like, I will become a human microphone stand. And they had I had a boardroom table full of kids pretending to be executives and moving the boom over them. And I'm listening and I'm like, I'm really liking this. I'm mixing by proximity. I can get the mic over someone and they sound clear, and they get over to somebody else. And, it was all about mic placement and staying out of the camera. And I liked the teamwork of how a film crew worked. And I was like, it's very different than theater. Touring in theater with a mask and puppet troupe was this ragtag thing. A film was, this uh, much more kind of, intricate level of things. Um, in theater, it's like the show must go on. In film, it's like, we're recording this; it has to be perfect. We'll either do it until it gets absolutely right, or we have one chance to get this right. Everyone has to be on their A game the whole time. It's much more stressful than theater. I can sit and watch my meters for a whole day and not lift a heavy thing, and I'll be exhausted just from the amount of mental focus and concentration it takes. Uh, it's I do find it rewarding though, and because I love what I do, and because I'm enamored of sound, and because I love storytelling and people and voices, and I learn things as we're interviewing people or coming up with you know ways of telling a story. And will an audience believe the narrative we're spinning? So how did I get in there? Yeah, it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And yes, there's a glut of people clamoring to get their foot in the door. And sometimes they start in a low level position and work their way up, or they have. I was lucky that I had a background in sound already that I could adapt to a new paradigm. Um, cable's cable, signal flow, signal flow. What I had to learn was how to conduct myself and etiquette on a set, and how to change my business model a bit, and to work with other people. Working as a team, and the hierarchy of things is different. And you have your creative people and your technicians, and people ask, "Is there a creative aspect to what you do? You're just recording people." And I was like, "Well, I do lots of creative problem solving." When we very first started talking, I said people take sound for granted, and it's no different in the world of any kind of media production. People will go cuckoo bananas over the location they're shooting on, and what camera they've got, and how well it's lit, and sound will be a total afterthought. And then they wonder why their film gets rejected from a festival because they didn't think about sound. You could have the most gorgeous actor on screen with this amazing costume in the beautiful location with you know pristine lenses, but if the sound is not there, or if the sound is bad, you've lost everything. um, Whereas people will forgive blurry focus, shaky camera, some dodgy lighting, or some little thing out of place, but if the sound is good, they're okay with it. You can cut away from your beautiful actor and just show some B-roll of their hands or an object, and as long as they can still hear what people are saying, they're totally fine with it. It's it's a sense that everyone takes for granted, but once it goes away, it can destroy everything. And we go back to how you asked me about silence earlier. How important is it? It can make or break something. You know, I'm grateful that I get to be in it, and being on set is one of my happy places. It's I it's not like other jobs. It's I haven't done 9 to 5 in a good long time, and the film world is, you're recreating life, and at the same time you're hanging out with usually very interesting people who've chosen to do this this harder way. And we all have to have some passion for it.
I got to ask you before it goes out of my mind. When you're watching a movie, are you a captions guy? Do you have to turn the captions on?
It's a huge discussion. I was watching some older films, and I could understand everything everyone said, every bit of dialogue. The music wasn't louder than the dialogue. The sound effects weren't dialogue. The actors weren't muttering. And I'll watch things now in the streaming era, and a lot of times I'm like, they're speaking English, and it's not some weird fringe English of old world England period reenactment stuff. It's modern conversation, and I'm having trouble understanding them. And I might have to throw captions on, and then it spoils surprises, or I hear you see the punchline of a joke before it's given, and it can be almost harmful in benefiting. I think it's definitely something that has plagued my specific industry. People are like, why aren't you, getting better sound? It's like, we're doing a really great job. And what's happening later on is it's being mixed for a theater and then put onto your TV set at home, and it doesn't line up as well. And everything is about, what your subwoofer is pushing out and not about the dialogue. It's frustrating. Um, I think because I watched a lot of foreign films with subtitles, I don't mind them, but I like turning them off once in a while, to just enjoy, what I'm hearing and seeing, and not have to process as much information, so I can focus more on the work that they created. Someone writing the subtitles was not the creative act; it was a transcription of things. Yeah, I can see them useful.
Do you think that if you were from the beginning trying to get involved in film, that you would not be as successful as you are currently in getting on film? I know you said you weren't trying to, even really get involved in film in the first place, and you kind of fell into a role of being involved in it. But do you think that if you had approached from the very beginning, I want to be in film, do you think you would have been as successful as you have been?
I've I've thought about the if I had I've thought about if I had any regrets, and I think, well, I wish I had gotten into film earlier. I think in my theater days, I was so enamored of theater that I couldn't see myself getting into the technical process, or maybe I was intimidated by how high the bar was for everybody wants to get into movies, and it's like seemed like an unreachable thing. It was up on some pedestal. A pedestal called like Hollywood, but working in film and television isn't all Hollywood. Sometimes it's just telling the story of your next door neighbor. You can do a documentary about the old guy down the street who's got stories to tell. It's storytelling. Um, if I had started in it earlier, I don't think I would have had as much of an outgoing personality. Maybe I think being in front of live audiences thousands of times, thousands and thousands of times. I can't even comprehend the numbers of how many times I've taken a bow, at either with a theater company or doing my own thing, and had that exchange of energy with a live audience that has made me a bigger, better, person and personality. I have to dial it down when I'm on a film set. I'm not there to be the personality. That's the talent's job. I'm supposed to be the technician. There's this trope of grumpy sound guys out there, and I try and be the other end of the spectrum where I'm more of a goofball. I'm making puns constantly and bad jokes and wisecracks and dad jokes until I hit record, and then I'm dead serious. But if I can, be fun to be around, you know, boosting morale on set, because it can be hard and punishing and exploitative. There are projects you can get on where you're not feeling the love and passion that you signed up for. And because every second costs so much money, and everyone's, planned something poorly, and it's starting to, all collapse around you, and it can be, unhealthy, psychically and emotionally and spiritually, I don't know, whatever level, everything you've aspired to be pursuing your dream in a creative field, and you're like, what am I doing here? I feel like I'm going to quit the next day. And then something amazing happens, and you're like, oh, that's why I'm here, and this is why I like what I'm doing. Or, someone comes to their senses and says, hey, let's do it this way. Here's something that everyone can get aboard. I think if I had started on a path, I don't know, I can't have regrets. I'm happy with where I am now, and it's because of the path I've taken. And every mistake I've made or misadventure have all shaped who I am along the way. And as long as I like who I am now, then every one of those moments is validated. If I was to take one of them away or change them, I might not be happy with my now. If I had continued on, say, my destructive path, in my teens, I'd be dead or in a rubber room somewhere, or in jail or something like that. And I think having had such a colossal mistake early in life, let me change that. I'm not going to say mistake, but having an experience that redirected me so early in life, I can count myself lucky from that. I don't wish it upon anybody else. Nobody should experience, the horrors that someone else has gone through. But if you can learn from someone else's mistakes, that's wisdom versus intelligence. Like it's like, I don't have to do those mistakes themselves. I don't know. I try and look for the gift in whatever decision making or choices happened along the way. Again, because they led to the moment I'm in now. Right now, I'm here. I'm being interviewed. I'm answering questions. I'm reflecting on my life. I'm thinking, why would the question you're asking me, be of interest to people? And if anything I say has made a difference somewhere along the way, or connects with someone, or resonates with you or your listeners or audience members, then whether I ever hear from them again or not, I don't know. I can say, whatever path you're on, try and make the most of it along the way, and do the more exciting things when they come.
Yeah, all that matters in the end is the now. I would say, and we've gone to have all of our life experiences. We got our ups, we got our downs, we have our struggles, like you're talking about, and they lead us to this point. And but ultimately, the only thing that truly exists at any given time is the present moment. The sacred moment that is now, and that's really special. And I think the work that you do when it comes to sound and really any sensory kind of experience, that really is a reminder of the present moment. If you're talking about sound, you're talking about visual, you're talking about even taste, you're having a fantastic meal. Our senses bring us into the present moment. And, and then that's, there's something that allow us to really treasure that sacred moment, I don't know if you resonate.
I'd give some homework to your listeners and your audience. Try putting on a blindfold every once in a while. Change your perspective. Try and become more of an active listener. And I use the word listen rather than hearing. We all hear stuff. It's passive. Listening is actively, perceiving things around you. And if you take away one of your other senses, if you take away the visual element, can you navigate around your house in the dark? Can you, if someone is leading you, somewhere, and you smell, plants growing here and there. Do you know where you are? Will we olfactory recall transport you somewhere? If you hear, if you hear a dog barking, it's like, oh, what part of the neighborhood am I in? Like, I know this dog that yips like this on this street and not on that street. I mean, it's funny how much it informs us.
Do you get concerned that in the present moment and in the future as well, that there are so many stimulating things when it comes to, I mean, even with our phone? I mean, we've talked previously before this conversation, but we talked about you don't have a computer. There's so many things that are, that really draw us out of the moment, these distractions. And the next generation that's coming up right now, the Zoomers, or even beyond them, the Generation Alpha, that's coming up, they grew up in a world where it's literally, it's a completely digital kind of experience. Not exclusively, but obviously most of their experiences have been digital, if I'm going to kind of gloss over. Do you get concerned that going forward, that we're just so overstimulated with these sensory experiences that, it really takes us away from appreciating them at all?
I have, two sides of, I look at things, I've got a split level head and a dualistic nature of like light, dark, good, bad. I'm always seeing both sides of the coin. It is amazing, astonishing, and fascinating. Technology is just the speed at which things is changing is astronomical. I see people get so excited about how much the digital world has opened up for them and how much of their life has, digital connectivity and things like that. And I say, what's it worth when the power's out? Can you make do with a few basic life skills? How much have we lost in having everything at our fingertips? When I want a vacation, I go somewhere with no cell reception. I wake up and I don't have any anxiety, and I'm not checking to see, what I'm missing out on. The FOMO, the fear of missing out, is attenuated, and I become more in the moment. I become more aware of my surroundings, myself, and the little things I do, and I find myself excited and getting active, engaged, and I wanted to make things and do stuff. And when I'm online, yeah, there's this endless well of stuff you can draw from. And yes, everyone should seek inspiration, but if you're just taking stuff in constantly, you might just get crammed up and not having the outlets to do things yourself, to get out and I'm not saying one has to regurgitate everything they've taken in, but contributing and maintaining a connection with, whether it be your fellow creatives or your community. I like that. I can, if I have a question about something or I want to learn something with a few keystrokes, I can have that information readily available in front of me. But at the same time, I think we do lose some of that human connection. So yeah, the blessing and the curse. I don't call myself a teacher. I mean, I give workshops and I instruct and facilitate lectures and little seminars on sound to small groups one at a time. I'm getting in front of a group of people and talking. I'm not performing, but I'm giving a presentation in a way that they can learn from and be memorable, that they might not get by scouring the internet for something, because they can ask me questions in real time and interact with me right there, then and there, and I can redirect everything I'm doing on the whim of one hand raised and say, hey, well, let's go with that. I'm not saying, I thrive in a classroom environment, but I love the aspect of passing on knowledge, because before the internet or the early information age, I came up in a time of maybe gatekeeping where it was trade secrets. So we don't want to show you how to do those things, this is my, this we're protecting our livelihood. Whereas I find that when I talk to young filmmakers and creatives about, say, production sound or just the how it's all done, I'm not giving away trade secrets so much as helping demystify what they've been taking for granted or what they might not think is as important. Um, it's more than just saying I need to validate my existence as a sound recordist or mixer. I say, how can I help you avoid these problems before they happen? How can I, give you some piece of knowledge that will save you the hugest, most massive headache that would turn you off from pursuing your dreams, making someone give up because they couldn't get past a hurdle. So ultimately, I think directly sharing knowledge versus getting it from getting it from the ether, I I gain a lot more back from it interacting with humans in that I can give a little bit of myself to everyone in the room and get back so much more. I am reminded of the fundamentals of what I do and why I love what I do, which I would not think about if I was just in my own world doing stuff. I would start taking my own work for granted if I wasn't telling other people about how it's done. I don't necessarily tell them how to do my job, but I tell them enough that they can, appreciate and understand, why I do what I do and why I love what I do. And I'm also making a connection with a future generation of creatives. And I can say, hey, you and I might be working on a project together sometime. And if you understand what I'm saying now and get the gist of it, it'll be easier for us down the road. And very often I'll run into them on set. I'll be with some media students at one of the local SUNY colleges. And within a couple of years, they'll say, hey, you spoke in my media class. And a couple of things you said helped my student project out or whatever. And I don't know if I can help my creative community, I get a better community out of it. If I withhold from my creative community, then my community isn't growing or getting better, and they're not going to get any closer to understanding me and making me feel more like part of their world. Uh, there's something to be said for openness versus the guarded mentality of your.
Yeah, that's got to be some of the most rewarding experiences in life when you actually pass on some of your learned skills onto another generation, and they're able to meet you down the path, and you see them again and you're like, oh my gosh, you're working together and you've imparted that knowledge in a way that's really been inspirational. There are any other things in life that really stick out to you, like particular moments of great value where you're like, oh my gosh, you're talking about right now where you impart the knowledge and people are really inspired by it. Other than that, I know you said you have kids. Are they a wealth of inspiration for you? And kind of going off that a little bit, how do they feel about your work?
I My kids are both creatively inclined. They both do music, and it's not at my nudging or urging, but always, how can I nurture and support it? I think I can't tell them how many times I've said to them, you will never have want for need of a microphone. I've got boxes of them. Here, go, knock yourself out. Because somewhere there's someone else who doesn't have access to one. It's like, here, I mean, my mom bought me a microphone for Christmas when I was in high school. I still have the thing. I use it as my talkback mic now. Like, hundreds of microphones later, I still have this original one. So if I can help support them, creatively, if I hear my son, thrashing on the guitar and I'm trying to sleep, I'm not going to say like, cut out that racket. I'm just going to say like, I've slept through noisier stuff on this, and it sounds like he's getting better each time. If I stopped him every time he was getting better, he's going to get better. Now he's in like 3 bands, you know. my daughter gave a presentation, basically a high school version of TED Talk for her senior project, about being a singer songwriter and how much she loves it, and that having an outlet helped her mental health. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the kind of stuff I've been talking about with you. And never having sat down with them and said, this is the way it works, but just to hear them come about that of their own accord. They weren't brought up in this is the process of, this is the creative process, this is how you do things. It was just, hey, I dig what you're doing, or I'm not sure what this is, or they're the generation who've grown up with screen time happening all the time, and at some point I'm sure I'll say, like, hey, how does this work? Just like my parents needed me to help them program a VCR. It goes around and comes around. They have definitely been imparted with some life skills that their peers might not, because I wanted them to have it. But there's other things that I'm sure they've completely missed out on. Like I talked to some of them, their peers, and like their friends don't know how to sew or cook an egg, and it's like these Gen Z tropes. I'm like, oh my god, learn how to do those things. But there's things I didn't learn. That everyone else has really commonplace things in their world and weren't part of me. Every generation's affected differently, but creatively, I feel definitely a sense of fulfillment in seeing my progeny embrace the creative aspects and do what they can to grow them and pursue those things. And am I going to push them into something more practical? Oh, you should do this for a career. So like, actually, they don't want to pursue artistic careers because they're afraid if they do it as work, maybe they won't be as interested in doing it. Like if someone assigns you to read a book, you lose interest in the book because it was homework. So I don't know. I think somewhere along the line, if artists in general, not necessarily my kids or myself, I wish if I could go back and say, I wish I had taken some business courses along with, my art learnings. I might have had a few missteps here and there and been a better business person. But, in the world I am today, I'm able to reach out to my colleagues and peers and support and find out how they do things and learn from them. I'm still learning. I'm still, always ready to admit, hey, I don't understand this. Can you show me something? And that being teachable, I think, is one of the best definitions of having some sense of humility. Saying, I'm not perfect, and I'd love to keep learning. And sometimes I learn by teaching someone else to do something. So whether I'm being a facilitator or a parent and instructing someone else, again, it reminds me of the fundamentals when I'm showing it to someone else. There's expressions in recovery circles. We keep what we have by giving it away. By showing someone a path of how we were able to survive, we are reminded of how we were able to survive. The only problem that I've encountered is here, take my advice. I'm not using it.
Yeah, you're right. I think we're always learning. To kind of get back to a point that you were talking about earlier, we always continue to learn. There really isn't, like, in life, I feel like we're trying to get to a particular point, right? We want to get to the point where we're like, okay, like, I've been successful. I have enough. We're trying to get to this like ethereal point that doesn't really exist, and we keep on striving towards it. And it's important to have a North Star, but it's also important to recognize that we're always growing, we're always learning. There really isn't an end point to this necessarily. It's this living experience that's very dynamic. I kind of want to get back to something you were talking about before. When you're talking to students and talking to people that you're trying to impart some knowledge on, some insider experience, when it comes to being dedicated to your work versus just doing the work because it's the skill, the hard skill that you've learned as time has gone on. I'm sure you've been in the experiences before where you've had to, you maybe haven't been as like dedicated to a particular project, but you have the skills that you developed, and you can make a living utilizing those skills. What would you, how would you describe the relationship between being dedicated to a work of art or some sort of commercial performance versus doing it because it's a way to make a living? How do you differentiate between those two?
Phrases like "you are not your job." The two-edged sword of it is, you know, I want to be able to have my life. I want to be able to have my career. Can I find some happy medium where I'm able to do both and, not have one affect the other too much or have one affect the other positively? Everybody's path is different. I can't tell anyone else to do what to do, but, what's worked for me is choosing something that I love. If you hear the expression over and over again, do something that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, I think what that means is, it's not going to feel like work if you're enjoying it. When I count myself, so lucky in the midst of it, of doing something, yes, I definitely feel that. If I'm on some project where it isn't fulfilling my soul, but it's paying my mortgage, yes, of course, there's that too. I've been on projects which I felt were downright toxic, but I had committed to do the job, and I'm a professional, and I will do the work I'm asked to do, even if it's totally against everything in my, my personality or ethics or beliefs. It's just like, this is the job I've been hired to do. I'm going to do the job. I'm not going to, and in my own mind, I'm saying, well, I will take these funds and divert them towards something I do believe in or making my life better. I don't have to buy into, into someone else's message or agenda. Um, I'm not the creator of those things. If I'm not recording it, someone else will. That's one time where I can say I can be divorced from the creative process and be okay with it. The separation of life and work, I don't know. I more look for the connection and where it overlaps in a good way. If I have a list of colleagues that crosses over with my list of friends, there's a lot of crossover. And if my community is built of people who I've worked with and had fun with, it's like, hey, do you guys ever actually hang out? It's like, well, yeah, we do. And there's other people who I work with and had some fun with, but it was more about the job. They don't become part of my community. They don't become part of my circle of friends. I'm okay with that too. We're here to do a job. We do our job. We're professional. But I definitely have found richer, deeper friendships with members of a film crew that I would go on a really long drive to a location with, and we talk along the way about our lives and our processes and our viewpoints on things. So if I'm looking to get something out of it that will enrich my life and life experiences, it's not always about technical challenge of developing my career. It's about enriching my life with the people surrounding me. And well, again, it maybe harkens back to, am I making an impression on folks? I think in this interview process, I know I'm jumping around a lot of times, and I'll hear a question from you, and I'll go off in this direction and that direction. But there's always some callback to something I've said earlier, and there is some sort of through line to it all. Where I hope the connection sort of resonates for people out there, that it somehow comes through. I think one of the more powerful things as a freelancer is the ability to say no. And I do say no sometimes. It's not always because a project isn't worth my time. It's because sometimes I need to prioritize my life. My daughter's going to graduate high school, and there's a film shoot running right through her graduation date. And I said, I can't do that day. but I'll get someone who can cover for me. I won't leave someone hanging in the lurch, but I need to set a boundary for myself. Like, hey, I get offered lots of projects once in a while. I don't get to attend my daughter's graduation every day. You know,
That's awesome.
I,
But
I had I had professional voice training in high school. An instructor came in and taught me voice while everyone else was learning instruments, and she taught me to sing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Fourth Movement, and some Haydn and some Bach and things like that. And it deepened my love for again, voice, language, speech, and realizing it is an instrument that I always have with me, and to have the
yeah,
voice be an instrument. It's also fun
wow.
at parties to suddenly start singing, a piece everyone knows the music of, but to hear you speaking in another language. And I can understand a bunch of German. I can't speak it fluently, but to suddenly sing in another language, it's a good party trick.
So you're talking about your teacher and how she kind of helped you with some of the like what you just told me. You have these teachers and you have that kind of help you with these different things. Who are some of your influential figures in life? Are there like teachers? You were talking about your parents earlier. Who are some influential people that really have guided you down the path that you're on today? Is there anyone that sticks out to you?
I remember drama coaches. We had an after school program. One second. It keeps falling out of my ear here. I remember drama coaches being in an after school program at New Paltz High School. And, we were basically learning how to work out social situations through theater games and exercises. And maybe it was one place where I, could be a little more outgoing and not so shy. Strangely enough, I think some teachers helped me by being prohibitive, and I would be creative out of spite. This is maybe a backward way of looking at things, but being reprimanded for doodling on my tests and homework, like, stop drawing cartoons on your paperwork here. Years later, running into a teacher in the post office as I got a paycheck for drawing cartoons that were getting published, and walking out the door, and before leaving, saying that teacher who said that to me is in the post office standing behind me. If I don't say this now, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. I turn around and I say, hey, remember you telling me, scolding me for drawing all over my homework? It's like, here's a paycheck for my cartoons, And you know what he said? He said, that's great, Carl. It was like, I was, full of vim and vigor and attitude in some petty way, but all he had to do was praise me for it instead. And, it was a nice little moment. I don't know. I think there have been times where there were, music teachers who would play me things that weren't hit music, and, or encountering people in my travels that were just different than people in my neighborhood, whether they were artists or just figures. I think just observing people, um, you know, in my community or other places I go, everyone could be my teacher. To the point of the question of like, did I have influences or inspiration? Um, I think that might have come more from. I think inspiration might have come more from things that I launched myself into musically and experimentally in performance art stuff. People who are doing kooky, crazy, outrageous things with you know wasn't traditional actors on stage reciting lines, but people making weird noises and building their own instruments, and someone having a home recording studio in an era when no one had home recording studios. This is going again back to my youth, and how little moments like that, saying, wow, I can do this myself, And maybe that comes down to echoing back to the accessibility. If you can see someone doing something that you had always pictured as being this unattainable thing, you're willing to take a risk and try it yourself, and you may very well surprise yourself. So uh, I think I find teachers, and they don't even know they're teaching me. I just say, hey, thanks for letting me experience this thing, or showing me a cool thing. And I do make a point of reconnecting with them later in life and saying, hey, you might not remember this, but there's a thing you did, and it it's something that's kept me going for ages. Um, and I, I I will tell that to people I'm talking to. It's like, maybe all this stuff I'm saying sounds like gobbledygook to you now, but maybe years down the road, one thing I say might stick in your head and give you an aha moment. And that's the whole reason I'm coming and talking to you today. So it's that spirit of passing along. My father is a teacher, in a sense that he is an artist first. He does his printmaking and painting, but he loves to show the process and his love of creating to other people. And I feel like he has imparted a good deal of that to me. Whereas my mother worked in medical professions as a nurse and healer. So I would tell people, I think I am using my creative facilities to teach something for healing, for betterment. So I'm taking elements from both of my parents and putting it on out there. So inspiration, again, nurturing environment, putting myself around people who are doing cool things that I admire. Maybe sometimes we start by copying things and realize we have to find our own groove later. That often is a path people take. They as a compliment may mimic or assimilate something someone else is doing, and then they say, well, somebody else is already doing that, I should do my own thing. And then they do their own thing, and it's like nothing else, and voila, you've arrived. There's everybody's got to find their own path.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everyone's got their own path in life, and what I find interesting is, so you're talking about how you encountered the teacher in the post office, and you've encountered people that have been there throughout different periods of your life, and they're still in your life in some sense. I'm curious. You still live in Ulster County. You're saying earlier you're brought up in Ulster County. What is it that makes that region of New York State important to you? And I know you said you've traveled the world. Why have you stayed in Ulster County when maybe down in like New York City, or you're even talking about LA, there may have been more business opportunities down there for you to explore. What is it about the Hudson Valley that's important to you?
What's important to me about the Hudson Valley, Ulster County, the Catskills, my sense of belonging, my sense of home, my sense of community. I love going to other places. I've had life-changing experiences in New Zealand and little towns across the United States, different spots in Germany and Italy and Belgium and all over the place of little vacations here and there. It's all the reason I'm going. Am I going to get away from myself, or am I going to find myself? I've done more finding myself on these little routines, but coming home feeling a little larger than life as a result of it. I still fit in here. What can I go out and forage and then bring back to my community and world? I like that I can make a living where I live. I can make a living doing what I love where I live. I love that there's a community that's very supportive. People used to throw out stats that I still hear in my head, like there's more artists per capita in Ulster County than Manhattan. And they were saying this 20 years ago, before huge influxes of people, hit us over the past couple of decades. Um, I know that I've gone to some places where I'm at an event and the whole audience is just sitting there watching and kind of like judging what's going on and not really getting into it because the whole audience is performers. In the production world, there's projects coming in from other places, and it's really made me gravitate towards hyper localism. How can someone coming from somewhere else come to our region and find everything they need? Some people, they move here with a plan of living here because there is beautiful scenery and restaurants and such. And in my work life, I say, hey, we've got this great area you can shoot in, but did you know that there are people who do all these technical skills and talented performers and stuff also right here that are ready to jump on board your project, so you don't have to bring in people from all over the place when you can source locally. And when people source locally, they have access to all their connections. When someone brings me aboard a project as a local hire for something happening in Poughkeepsie or Newburgh or Kingston or maybe up north towards the capital region, whatever, I say, yeah, I'm happy to jump aboard. Anything else you need? And then having a whole catalog of, if they have a wish list, I'm saying, yes, I know someone who has this vintage car. Yes, I know someone who has this piece of equipment. Oh, yeah, there's someone who has a rental house there. Oh, yeah, there is a gazebo by the lake in this town. It's really quiet. Just having some catalog of stuff in my head that makes someone know when they bring me on a project, they're getting more than just me and my gear. They're getting my life experience and my creative community that I love being a referral monster, just saying like, oh, who can we all get together with this? And the best case scenario, if your creative community is also full of your friends, you can get your friends working together with you on a project, then you're enjoying it even more. And that's how the work becomes more fulfilling. If I'm on a project and the cinematographer is a best friend of mine, I know no matter how sideways the project goes, I'm still going to have a great time because I'm working alongside my friends. And I'll be, I'm glad to be here every moment of it, even when things are arduous, let's say.
So we originally connected through the Hudson Valley, the poetry group. And I'm curious, you talked originally about, we're going back further into the conversation, but how, you do all these public performances and you have done written work in the past. How do you relate to, the poetry scene in the Hudson Valley? You're going all the way back. You're talking about the 90s, how there's the spoken word community in the Hudson Valley. How do you relate to that community? How have you seen it grow, and where do you find your place in that world?
The poetry scene, it's there. It's sort of on my outer orbit. A best friend of mine was like poet laureate of Orange County, a colleague I toured with for decades doing, ghost stories and performances with instruments and theremin stuff, there's readings I hosted for a long time. And now, some of that's in my memory, but I will still show up. I'll make an appearance at a random open mic and nobody knows me there. And they don't know, radio or film or my, being in papers or, things like that. And I'll act really shy. I'll pretend I don't know how to adjust the microphone. And then I'll explode and be very dynamic and do this crazy wild performance. And it's like finding a new audience. My material can be the same or it can be new, and I'll connect with another generation of people who are poets and writers. And if they ask me about like my process, I'm totally say, oh, here's how I do it, and very open about it. And it's often kind of unconventional and different from from others in that I don't have like an educational background in literature or any academic credentials. I didn't go to college. I just woke up there a lot. I went to a lot of college poetry readings, I would go to the SUNY schools poetry clubs and perform there and meet friends and make stuff there, or I'd hitchhike across the United States in my 20s and find out where there was a poetry reading in some town I'd never been to, show up and perform there, and then disappear, and they'd never see me again. I'd throw myself into these situations. Today, more it's something I don't tout myself as. If I'm introducing myself to someone, I tell them I work in entertainment or film or television. I don't come first and foremost, I'm a spoken word performance artist. But someone standing right next to me will say, "You should hear Carl do his thing," and oh, it's a blessing when someone else will. If you toot your own horn, it always sounds a little, something else. But if someone standing next to me says like, and there's like, "Oh, really? What do you do?"
I feel like you just kind of glossed over something that is extremely interesting. You're talking about going across the United States, hiking across the United States. What is that
Hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking. Nonetheless,
Yeah.
Hitchhiking. First off, are we talking the 90s? We talking about what decade are we talking about here? When did that happen?
I didn't get a license until I had impending parenthood upon me. My oldest son is 20, so 20 years ago, I had a permit. But yeah, I traveled all around rural Catskills and Ulster County by hitchhiking, by riding a bicycle, by walking. I got around that way. And I think in my early 20s, a couple of years into recovery, getting clean, trying to figure out who I was like, well, let me do the quintessential road trip. And I bought a train ticket to Albuquerque with a return ticket back to New York, leaving from Seattle, but nothing in between. And I just forced myself to get from one place to the other of my own volition. And that's where I wrote a lot of my material. Just being open to chance and I don't know. I did a lot of growing, and I was very fortunate, very lucky. I mean, yes, I could unpack a crazy, glut of adventures into this one little chapter of my life. But it's only like this much of so many of the experiences I've had. It's not something I would recommend somebody try to do today. It's definitely not for everybody. There were definitely points where I either lived like a king or lived like an animal. But in furtherance of my creative process, I can be performing a piece, and as I'm saying the words, remember a time and a place that I was when I had those thoughts and wrote them, and think, are they dated or do they still apply today? Have I outgrown something? And the material has stayed the same, but I've changed and my perceptions have changed. And does it still hold up? And I say, the material is as timeless as some of the places I went as I did them. My sense of adventure, I think doing something like that has made me not sweat the small stuff in so many other environments of my life. When everybody else is freaking out and things are bedlam, I'm like, I've been through so much more, experiences than this. This isn't really that bad. I don't know. I think throwing myself at challenges or making decisions to do something a certain way, makes everything else seem like a luxury sometimes. I sometimes step back and observe my own demeanor in a situation and think, like how can I be so calm and cool and collective through something? It's like, well, I've already been through some some crazier adventure than this and came out okay. It's not it's not the end of the world.
So we talked a little bit about the past, a little bit about the present. I want to ask you a little bit about your future. Mm-hmm. What are some projects that you see coming up in your immediate future? And I also want to ask you, what are some of your future aspirations? What are some things that you really want to accomplish looking forward in life?
when I look forward to the future, I think of, like, say, my father, who's in his 80s. He's shows no signs of retiring. It's like, how is he able to continue his creative process, as he goes. Um, I think what'll happen when the day comes when I can, no longer lift a boom pole. It's like, oh, maybe I'll become a sound designer and do post, and I'll have a nice studio or something. I had a little studio one time doing voiceovers, and I packed it into boxes and worked in radio and never built it again. And now I'm a mobile person going all over the place. And I think about, is what I'm doing sustainable? Will it carry me to the future? Will technology change? And it's changing very rapidly, where what I'm doing will become outmoded. I don't know. I think if I focus on, capturing stories and, bringing the human experience out there, it'll still be going. In down the road, I've had fantasies of having a venue of some kind where people could, express themselves and do things. Would it be something I could, do to continue making a living later down the road? I don't know. Is it something I could do in my retirement? Who knows? Quote unquote retirement. If I take things down a notch, um, I wouldn't mind, going out and getting some more world experiences, and, taking a break from, production life, and just having more time as a human being on the earth, and learning and enriching myself in that way. Um, I do try to stay in the now a lot, and the future, it's always so in flux that, I'll set goals, but I won't make some hard set. I need to have this exact situation down the road, because, I don't want to set up myself for disappointment, or I don't want to be locked into something rigidly if my plans change. Um, I could find myself in who knows where. If somebody had told me a while ago that I'd be doing what I'm doing today back in my youth, I would have laughed at them. I would have thought that's crazy. That sounds so preposterous. If anybody had told me I would have survived this long, if I was looking back at the person I was in my youth, who was, just in a world of madness and insanity and destruction, I would have laughed at them. So I have to think that my future self is going to laugh at some of the moments I'm in right now. you know, you know, thinking it's like, you're going to be fine. I I have a level of acceptance, and in that, no matter what path I choose, somehow it will be the right one. Whether it's something that keeps me going as a career, or keeps me going motivated, just to be on track with the human energy and spirit of things. Um, I can be happy in what I'm doing. If I write this book and, it becomes a thing, am I going to keep being a writer and doing more? I don't know. It's not something I'm gravitating towards, but I'm enjoying the process I'm in the moment. Would I, I made one documentary film, but I never tout myself as a filmmaker. Would I like to make some more films? Sure. Will I still be the sound mixer for them? Or will I be, will I go up a few rungs of the ladder, and put on the producer and director hat more? I'm not closed off the possibility, but I still so much love what I do where I am now, that, I don't feel, I'm not craving, that transition.
So, Carl, we're getting to the end of the interview here. Is there anything else that you really want to discuss while we're having this conversation?
Sure. If you've listened to me say a bunch of things, you, my interviewer, and you, the audience, I've talked about being accessible. And I want to I want to impart the sincerity behind that. I'm a real person in the real world, and feel free to reach out to me. I can be found. Just look up Carl Welden, not Carl Weldon. That's somebody else. It's a broker in Illinois. I looked him up one time. His name is spelled different. I, you know, in my freelance life, I have this flexibility, and I say, hey, people are like, hey, can I, take you out for breakfast and just pick your brain about something? And I'm like, sure, we'll sit and talk, and I'll suddenly have a 2-hour breakfast conversation where, you know, I get to process ideas, and whether I'm saying things I've said 100 times before, or taking things in a new direction, I can either find affirmation and validation in what I'm doing, or impart new knowledge to someone who wants to get a little further down the road. So I say the thing I would want to leave an audience with is like, hey, give me a shout, find me. Especially if you are, whether you're new to the area or you've been here a long time, the connection and connectivity I've mentioned, it's a real thing. And I value, that I can have people from all walks of life in my community and see how we can all, I don't know, contribute to something greater out here. I'm not out to, start a movement, or I'm not on some big mission. Like, again, I'm not here to save the world, but I want to experience as much as I can, in the world I'm in, and make this place I'm in, feel bigger. And small town USA has room to grow in your experiences of it, and who you bring with you and who you are in those places. Whether you're a big fish in a small pond, or or one that really stands out in a big one. Um, that's that's the last trailings leaving off in my mind right now.
Well, Carl, I want to appreciate you for your time today and all the stories that you've shared. I mean, you've imparted a lot of very valuable lessons here today. I think just by sharing your experiences, I think that's a very valuable well of knowledge. And I know you talk about going out there, and you talk to the next generation of people coming up that are very interested in sound as a career, as an art form. And I think that our conversation here today is another way that people can get some form of inspiration and get some form of knowledge if they're interested in moving down that path in their career, or just the life experiences that you've shared today. I think are valuable for really any facet of life, no matter what career field that you're in. So I just want to say thank you again for your time here today. I really appreciate everything, and thanks again, Carl. It's been great.
It's been my pleasure. And if anyone wants to find me, you can search at Carl Welden in most social media platforms. That's CarlWelden. And if you're out there and you happen to be needing sound for a project, feel free to give me a shout, and that would be fun too.
There you go. All right. Thanks a lot, Carl.
Take care. Be well.